What it do, cuckolds? It's your boy, the Hater. Hater Outdoors! You know what I'm saying? Hater Outdoors. So now, today's video is going to be effectively a continuation of yesterday's video. In the sense that yesterday, I made a video about how Triple H is killing wrestling. Everything I said was completely true. But there were some things that I mentioned that I didn't properly contextualize, in the sense that I gave Triple H and the WWE the benefit of the doubt that I didn't deserve to give them. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Specifically, we're going to talk about the viewership of WWE. And you know, no matter how you cut this cookie, you know, or how you slice this pie, you know what I'm saying? Or how you divide the popcorn, you know, think of many different metaphors. The reality still remains that the facts are the facts. And the facts say that Raw on Netflix, when it debuted, they made a big deal out of it. It got somewhere north of $5 million. $5 million. 5 million views, cucks. It probably got $5 total. But it got 5 million views. I think it was 5.6 million. It was some number that is respectable, you know? That is a legitimate number. It was the #1 show on Netflix. I don't know if that's anything to brag about, because it's like every foreign detective drama is #1 on Netflix at some point. But nevertheless, it had a successful debut, right? That we can all agree on. Now, yesterday I said that they've dropped 50% of their viewership, and I kind of like made this point that, well, that's to be expected because it's a one-off. But is it to be expected? Here's the thing, right? If you have Monday Night Raw, you know, and you have an opportunity to get a lot of eyeballs on your show, meaning that a lot of people that may not tune in the next week, as a matter of fact, 2.5 million of them didn't, you understand what I'm saying? But you know there's going to be people that need to be enticed. There's going to be people that this is your chance to get them. This is it. This is your chance to convert them to fans. And if you can't, then you suck, right? It's basically just that. So the reality is that when WWE debuted on Netflix, what they should have done, and what I thought they would do, is have a solid, you know, debut episode, which, you know, arguably they did, right? They had Roman Reigns in there, you know, John Cena showed up, etc. But then you got to follow that up, you know, for at least a couple of weeks until you get the what's it called, the viewer conditioned to watch Raw. Then you can completely drop the ball like they're going to do anyways and just hope that people stick around. And then that, if they did that, maybe they could have like had 3.5 million today, 4 million today, you know? Instead they have 2.5 million. And this number is nothing to laugh at. We're talking about going from 5.5 million, let's just say 5 million for the sake of argument, down to below 2.5 million, let's just say 2.5 million for the sake of argument, for the sake of quick mathematics. Now, that represents not only a drop of 50%, but perhaps most importantly, it represents a drop of 2.5 million people, right? 50% isn't that big of a deal sometimes. You know, if you have like, I don't know, 10 friends and you drop 5 of them and now you have 5 friends, it's like, you still got 5 friends, you had 10, big deal, right? But we're talking about 2.5 million people who have actively decided, oh, I've watched this show and it's not good, right? That's what that means. That means that 5 million people watched it, and half of them thought it was bad enough to not watch it again. Like, obviously the drop-off wasn't week 1, week 2, but the point still stands, you understand me? And that's kind of the idea. And this is something that needs to be addressed. We have a situation where your show was put on TV, and half the people that gave it a chance thought to themselves, oh, I'm not giving this a chance again, this is fucking retarded. That's basically what happened. And this is not normal, right? This is not normal. Like, that's not how growth works. And I understand that WWE is in the plateau stage of their business, as far as I can tell. The next thing is the collapse, you know, but like, still, you want to try to keep growing. And all of this falls on Triple H, like I said yesterday. You know, a lot of people don't want to admit this, even though the evidence is right in front of us. It's like Triple H is emulating ROH. You understand? He's emulating the other wrestling indie feds that Dave Meltzer talks about and that Dave Meltzer puts over. Now, with all that being said, you know, we have the situation that we have because of that. Because Triple H doesn't want the WWE to feel big time anymore. He wants it to feel small time. So as a result, you're going to get small time numbers. The one time it feels big time, you get 5 million views. Then all of a sudden people are like, that didn't really feel big time. They basically lied to me, which is exactly what happened, right? they tell you it's going to be a big deal. You're going to see these superstars. Then the next week, none of them show up. And then all you're left with is like Sami Zayn. And you're like, oh, I thought this guy was just like an opening match jobber. I didn't know he was like a central figure of this show. Fuck this guy, right? And that's how that goes down. You understand me? The fact of the matter is that if you act like a small-time company, you're going to get a small-time company's results and therefore their revenue eventually as well, right? Which brings me to the next point. Everyone is always focused on how much money the company is making. Now, I agree, that's obviously the most important element because it's a company, right? But it doesn't exist in a vacuum. In other words, you have to consider and adjust the amount of revenue for different things. So for example, nowadays, there's just more money to be made if you have the size of WWE because technology has risen to the point where you can monetize things that you previously couldn't monetize. One such example would be the WWE network, right, when it first started. You know, before that, it's basically not feasible. You know what I mean? You had like Netflix, and then after Netflix, the second one that had any kind of like traction was the WWE network, which really shows how much of a genius Vincent Kennedy McMahon is. But anyways, the point is, like, you couldn't do that in 1999, right? You couldn't do it because you didn't have the same level of library, and there was no technology that allowed you to stream a random episode of Raw. You know, people had tapes back then, still, you know? So the point is, there's different ways to make money, and that's gonna, of course, affect the bottom line, you know? But we gotta look to it like in a one-by-one comparison, right? Because if the Attitude Era happened today, they also would have the WWE Network. They also could have sponsors, and it would be like 100 times more profitable than wrestling is today. So don't get confused. Don't confuse the business side with the wrestling side. We largely talk about the wrestling side on this channel. Sometimes we dabble into the business, as I'm used to doing. But nevertheless, the point is, if you strip everything away that is contemporary and that is relevant only today, then WWE is doing poorly by every metric otherwise, you know? And again, I don't want to hear the nobody watches anymore. Like, at this point, we're comparing data from January, you know what I mean? We're not even going back to the Attitude Era and saying there were 8 million viewers. We had 5 million viewers with one counting method, and now, even though we have an inferior and more loose counting method, we still can only get 2.5. You understand what I'm saying? Nobody cares about this. Now, there's going to be a bump, I would imagine, for this week's, or like last week's, I should say, because they always, you know, release the viewership the week after. There's going to be a bump because of the John Cena situation, but then it's going to go right back down, you know, if there even is a bump. But I would imagine there is. The point is, just because, you know, WWE started off really high on Netflix, and that's an expectation, you know, just like AEW, right? AEW started out with 1.4 million on their debut episode, which was a massive success, especially in hindsight, if you think about it, right? It's a massive success, 1.4 million 1.4 million viewers for a new show, especially a new wrestling show. That's pretty sick. But then after that, it's been literally downhill since that day. It's been downhill for 5 years, right? Nobody is saying, like, you know, how could they, you know, shit the bed? How could they drop the ball? But the reality is that it isn't indicative of something, right? 1.4 million people are giving it a chance, and like 500,000 of them left by the next episode, which means that 1/3 of the people that gave you a chance, 1/3 of them were like, I'm not giving this a chance again. You know, that's how bad it was. You know how bad something has to be for that to be like, you know, the case? It's like those movies that you start in the first 10 minutes, you're like, yeah, I'm not watching this shit, you know, and you turn it off, right? It's like that, but that's not the situation that we want for ourselves, you know what I mean? The fact of the matter is, for better or for worse, cucks, this company is not headed in the right direction, you know? They can't even retain half of their viewership, which again, for them, represents 2.5 million morons who have tuned into this. Well, I guess they're the 2.5 million smart people too, because they tuned in, they're like, yeah, I'm not watching Karrion Kross and Sami Zayn. Absolutely not. You know, I'd rather watch the 19th Norwegian drama about a girl dying in like an icy town, and then, you know, the two cops investigate. There's like every fucking show on Netflix is basically that. So the point is, you know, you can't even compete with like random ass shit like that, you know? Like, let alone, like, forget about competing with like the NBA and the NFL and like, you know, actual like primetime programming, you know? Even like, you know, competing with like The Rookie or these, you know, type of dramas and shows and comedies that get like, you know, 5, 6, 10 million viewers. The wrestling is no longer there. And it's clear, you know, based on what I just said, it's clear that it's because of mismanagement. Because if somebody were to put together, let's just say, for example, that the Monday Night Raw January 6th show was like a WrestleMania. Let's just say that that was WrestleMania, right? Where they were like, fuck this, you know, instead of Monday Night Raw, we're going to have Monday Night WrestleMania this year. It's going to be like an off year. We're doing WrestleMania, right? And instead of having this year's WrestleMania, let's say they put on, I don't know, how about WrestleMania 27? Or how about WrestleMania 25? Or how about WrestleMania 17, you know? A lot of people's favorites. Or honestly, any WrestleMania during like, from like 15 to like 20. If they put in any one of those WrestleManias, you know, like it would draw, let's say it draws 5 million people again. A lot of those people would stay because they'd be watching something that is entertaining and good. But if what you give people is like Roman Reigns versus Solo Sikoa, and then Roman Reigns shows up only at the Rumble since then, I mean, Roman Reigns is just like a complete piece of shit at this point. Like, I have no interest in him at all, you know? As a matter of fact, if you do like a career retrospective, like Roman Reigns hasn't had enough of a career to be like a legend. Like, straight up, he hasn't had enough matches. You know, like Ludwig Kaiser probably has more WWE matches than Roman Reigns. Probably not, that's a stretch, obviously, but he will at one point, you know? Like, Roman Reigns came in during that time when, like, people just weren't expected to wrestle as much, you know? But that's also a Triple H problem. Like, Vince McMahon would be like, no, what? You know, like all those stories where he's like, you have to quit your life, basically, to be like my bitch and, like, you know, wrestle for me. You know, like, you have, like, Vince Russo, he's like, my kids, and he's like, just hire nannies, you know? He doesn't want anyone to prioritize anything other than their jobs. And I understand that makes for a bad boss, but last time I checked, we weren't all sissies concerned about the mental health of everybody that works for WWE. What the fuck is that all about, by the way? It's like, fans are now concerned about the people. Like, I don't give a fuck. You know what I mean? Like, obviously on a human level, I don't want them to suffer, but it's like, we're talking about wrestling like, you know, the TV show, right? We want wrestling to be good. Now, if wrestling, the only way for wrestling to be good is by people suffering psychologically and in a familial sense, then fine. Like, you know, we don't want that, right? But we also don't care because we're not going to sit here and, you know, it's not a therapy session, right? We're talking here about what would make wrestling good again. You know, at the end of the day, you can find someone who like has no interest in having a family and they can dedicate their life to wrestling and you know, entertain us. Like John Cena, for example, right? He has no interest in children because he's like a workaholic. You know, I don't think that's a good idea, but you know, I get it, right? And it provides good entertainment for me because he's more focused. You know, the problem is that, like, we need a Vince McMahon, motherfucks. We can't have a Triple H where it's like, you know, you have someone go, like, on leave for, like, you know, like Charlotte Flair. She hasn't had, like, a singles match in, like, a year and a half, you know? And quite frankly, like, if we're all being honest, you look at Charlotte Flair and you're like, this is just, she's not compelling enough to be able to do this. You know, I kind of blame Brock Lesnar, but Brock Lesnar at least was compelling enough because if you look forward to Brock Lesnar, you're like, it's Brock Lesnar, you know what I mean? Like, it's a once-in-a-lifetime human. You know, he's like Pat McAfee said, the alpha male of our species. You know, that's a different story. You can, like, you don't like it, but you can tolerate it with Brock Lesnar, right? It's kind of like this LeBron James situation, right? Where a lot of people are turning on LeBron. Now, I'm a big LeBron fan, as some of you may know. Now, the reality is, yes, of course, LeBron's son is there for nepotism, right? And this is the parallel that I'm making. But there are situations in which we can kind of combine these scenarios into one, you know, effective point that deals with both, right? In LeBron's case, he's crying and bitching and moaning about his son having opportunities and, you know, getting the respect of the media and all that other stuff, right? And it's the same thing. Like, you have the same thing with Brock Lesnar, right? Where it's like, Brock Lesnar's out there, he just calls the shots because he's Brock Lesnar. But there's a big difference between LeBron. Like, first of all, people aren't supposed to be playing professional sports with their children, right? This is only doable because LeBron is like an elite level, like, athlete and human being, you know what I mean? So he can do that because he's fucking 40 and he's like, you know, I don't want to say he's in his prime, but he's like almost in his prime still, you know what I mean? Like, it's crazy how good he is. So, like, because he's that good, he can bring in his son, and of course he's going to get a pass because he's LeBron James. The same way that, you know, Brock Lesnar gets a pass because he's Brock Lesnar, you know? But this doesn't extend to everybody else in the NBA, right? If, like, I don't know, Drew Holiday, right? Or if, I don't know, like Tracy McGrady even back in the day, right? Or like, I don't know, Jermaine O'Neal, or even Shaq, you know? Unless you're LeBron, you don't get to just do that, right? If you're, I don't know, if you're like, who's like a completely mid player, Schroeder. If you're Schroeder, right, who I like actually, if you're Schroeder, you don't get to just bring your son in and start calling the shots. You're Schroeder. you're going to do as you're told your entire career, right? If you're JJ Redick when he was a player, you're going to do exactly as you're told your entire career. If you're maybe like Luka Doncic or, you know, Jokic or LeBron or Giannis or, you know, someone like obviously Michael Jordan, you know, if you're like of that level, like an almost LeBron, if you ask me, right? Well, of course, you know, Jordan is like basically the equivalent, but you know what I'm saying. If you're in that level, you might have a chance. Right? But if you're Charlotte Flair, like Charlotte Flair is like the Schroeder of fucking, you know, of WWE. She thinks she's LeBron, but like she's nowhere near. You know? She's not LeBron. And Roman Reigns is not LeBron. Like the only LeBron in wrestling is John Cena and Brock Lesnar and then The Rock maybe. Right? That are currently still around. Nobody else is good enough to just call their shot. Right? And maybe The Undertaker player, but that's a little bit more nuanced. So that's the problem. The problem is like everyone thinks they're LeBron. Like Kevin Owens is like, I'm not going to wrestle until the pay-per-view. You're fucking Kevin Owens. You shouldn't even be wrestling at all. We should have fired you years ago. And that's the problem with Triple H. He doesn't want to do that, you know? When Kevin Owens doesn't feel like wrestling, he throws in Tozawa. That's why the roster of WWE 2K25 is like 250 wrestlers. You know? I know some of them are legends, but nevertheless, it's 250 wrestlers, motherfuckers. You know? Who are these people? Exactly. You only need like a roster of like 40, 50 people. Even if you have 2 shows, especially if like there's no, you know, brand solidarity and everyone just goes where the fuck they want. Cody Rhodes can appear on Raw at literally any week, you know? You don't have to tune in to SmackDown to watch Cody Rhodes. And not that anyone would, but you understand what I'm saying, right? The point is, there's very little accountability and very little advancement. And all of this falls on the cuckster himself, Triple H cucks. That being said, take care of yourselves and your mothers.